She thought she was meeting her nurse's daughter. But that little girl would soon make her question everything she knew about life, science, and miracles. The snow fell thick and heavy that December afternoon, blanketing the Thompson mansion in a silence so pure it almost felt sacred. Beyond the frost-covered windows, the world glimmered with light. Christmas garlands, crystal icicles, and 1,000 tiny bulbs wrapping the estate in gold. But inside, behind those towering glass panes, Margaret Thompson sat motionless in her wheelchair, staring into a winter she could no longer touch. At 68, she had mastered the art of stillness. It was all she had left. 15 years had passed since the accident. 15 long years of learning to exist without motion, without purpose, without dreams. Her mansion had become a museum of memories. The grand staircase she used to glide down, the gardens where she once walked hand in hand with her late husband, and the ballroom that hadn't echoed with laughter since the night her legs stopped working. The fire in the marble hearth crackled weakly, its warmth failing to reach the cold that lived inside her. Her hands, elegant but frail, rested on the armrests of the chair she despised. Every day was a repetition of the one before. Therapy sessions, doctor's visits, long stretches of silence. Hope had become a language she no longer spoke. "Mrs. Thompson," called a voice from down the hall, soft and melodic. "Your physical therapy appointment is in an hour." It was Sarah Collins, her nurse, young, kind, and far too gentle for a world as cruel as Margaret's had become. Sarah had been with her for only a few months, but already her warmth filled the mansion in ways money never could. Margaret had come to depend on her voice more than she cared to admit. "Thank you, Sarah," she replied absently, her gaze still fixed on the falling snow. "I'll be ready." She wouldn't be. She was never ready for anything anymore. The doorbell chimed, a soft, melodic sound that echoed across the marble halls. Margaret frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone. Dr. Hayes wasn't due until evening, and her nephew James never visited, unless he needed another check signed. From the hallway came the sound of hurried footsteps and muffled conversation. Then, a voice Margaret didn't recognize, a voice so pure and full of life that it seemed to melt the frost in the air. "Mommy, look at this big house." The voice was small, high, and brimming with wonder. Margaret turned toward the sound, curiosity breaking through the numbness. Moments later, Sarah appeared in the doorway, cheeks flushed, expression apologetic. Beside her stood a little girl with golden curls that caught the firelight, and blue eyes so bright they seemed almost unreal. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Thompson," Sarah said quickly. "This is my daughter, Emma. The babysitter canceled, and I didn't have anywhere else to—" "It's fine," Margaret interrupted, though her eyes never left the child. Emma stood very still, gazing at the old woman with the kind of intensity that made Margaret uneasy. The girl couldn't have been more than 8 years old, yet there was something timeless in her expression, something far too knowing for a child. "Your house is pretty," Emma said softly, taking a small step forward. "But it feels sad." Sarah winced. "Emma, that's not—" Margaret raised a trembling hand. "It's all right." She found herself strangely intrigued. "Why do you say that?" The little girl tilted her head, studying Margaret with eyes that seemed to see through bone and memory. "Because it feels like the house misses you walking through it," she said. "And so do your legs." Margaret blinked, startled. "My legs?" Emma nodded earnestly. "They're asleep," she said. "But I can wake them up." Sarah froze. "Emma, that's enough. I can make you walk again," the girl interrupted, her voice calm, almost serene. For a heartbeat, the room went utterly still. The only sound was the faint hiss of the fire and the ticking of an antique clock on the mantel. Then Margaret let out a short, bitter laugh, the kind that had become her only defense against disappointment. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, her tone gentle but weary. "That's very kind of you to say, but my doctors, the best in the world, have told me I'll never walk again. ever." Emma's expression didn't change. "Doctors don't always know everything," she said simply. Her certainty was unsettling. She didn't sound like a child repeating something she'd been told. She sounded like someone who knew. Sarah stepped forward nervously. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm so sorry. She has an imagination that—" "Stop apologizing," Margaret said softly, not taking her eyes off the girl. Something in her chest, something she'd buried 15 years ago, gave a faint flutter. "Tell me, Emma," she said. "What makes you think you can help me?" Emma took another step closer, her boots leaving tiny prints on the marble. "Because I can feel what's broken inside people," she said matter-of-factly. "When I touch them, sometimes the broken parts remember how to work again." Margaret's breath caught. Her logical mind rebelled against every word. But her heart, that aching, hollow heart, whispered that maybe, just maybe, this child was different. "You think my legs just forgot?" she whispered. Emma's small hand lifted, delicate and deliberate. "Not just your legs," she said. "Your heart forgot too." The words struck deep, slicing through years of denial and bitterness. For a moment, Margaret couldn't speak. How could a child see so clearly into the ache she'd hidden from the world? Sarah moved quickly to stand between them. "Mrs. Thompson, please, she doesn't understand." But Margaret raised her voice for the first time in years, not harshly, but with authority. "Let her finish." Emma smiled, not playfully, but gently, as if she'd been waiting for permission. "I can help you, Mrs. Thompson," she said. "But only if you want me to." Margaret swallowed hard. "And what would you need to do?" "Just touch your legs," Emma said, "and listen." "Listen," Emma nodded, "to what they're trying to say." Margaret stared at her, torn between laughter and tears. She wanted to dismiss the child, to push away this strange hope that had no business returning. But the truth was, for the first time in 15 years, she wanted to believe. "All right," she said finally, her voice shaking. "You can try." Emma's smile widened, lighting her entire face. Slowly she stepped forward, the firelight painting gold across her hair. Sarah stood frozen, half terrified, half awed. Emma stopped beside the wheelchair, her small hand hovering inches above the blanket covering Margaret's legs. The warmth from the fire seemed to lean toward her, as though even the room itself was holding its breath. "Are you ready?" Emma asked softly. Margaret's throat tightened. She gave a small nod, her voice barely a whisper. "I've been ready for 15 years. As Emma's small hand descended toward her paralyzed legs, the world held its breath, and in that single heartbeat, Margaret Thompson's past, present, and future collided. Hope was something she'd buried long ago, but that little girl dug it back up with a single touch. The mansion was silent except for the soft hum of the fireplace and the faint hiss of snow brushing against the tall windows. The golden Christmas lights outside blinked against the darkening sky, their glow reflecting off marble floors and polished glass. Everything in Margaret Thompson's home gleamed, from the ornate chandeliers to the silver-framed photographs that lined the walls, but the brightness only made the emptiness louder. For 15 years, this house had been her kingdom and her prison. It had seen her rise to fortune, then watch helplessly as her world crumbled. Her husband gone, her body betrayed, her laughter replaced with the hum of her wheelchair's wheels on tile. And yet, tonight, something fragile was stirring in the air. Something she hadn't felt in so long that it frightened her more than the silence ever had. Emma stood before her like a beam of sunlight that had wandered in from another world, her golden curls catching the firelight, her small face calm and certain. Sarah stood close by, her hands wrung tight, her nervousness palpable. "You really want to do this?" Margaret asked, her voice quieter than she intended. Emma nodded, her eyes unwavering. "I told you, Mrs. Thompson. I can help." Sarah took a hesitant step forward. "Ma'am, please. She's just a little girl. She doesn't understand what she's saying." Margaret glanced up at her nurse, kind, cautious, good-hearted Sarah, and saw the fear there. Not fear of the child, but of disappointment. Sarah had seen enough false hope in hospital rooms to know what it could do to a person's soul. "I've spent 15 years hearing what doctors understand," Margaret said softly. "Maybe it's time I listened to someone who doesn't." Sarah froze. "You can't really believe—" "No," Margaret interrupted, "but I want to." That was the truth. She didn't believe, not yet, but for the first time in years, she wanted to. Emma gave a small nod and reached forward, her hands trembling just a little as they hovered over Margaret's legs. "It might feel strange," she warned gently, "like something waking up after a long, long nap." Margaret managed a faint, ironic smile. "I've been sleeping for 15 years, dear. I think I can handle strange." The moment the child's palms brushed against the blanket, the air seemed to change. The warmth from the fireplace flickered, and a faint hum, so soft it could have been imagined, filled the room. Margaret felt it first as a whisper of warmth, almost too faint to notice, deep in the parts of her body she had long stopped acknowledging. Her breath caught. "Emma," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What are you—" "Shh." Emma's eyes were closed, her face serene, her hands still and steady. "The sleeping parts are listening." Margaret wanted to scoff, to rationalize, to say this was nothing more than suggestion or wishful thinking. But then she felt it again. Stronger this time. A flicker of sensation, like a spark in the dark. It started in her calves, or the place her mind remembered her calves being, and climbed upward, soft and steady, like the slow trickle of sunlight through curtains. Her heart began to pound. "Sarah," she gasped, her voice shaking. "Sarah, do you feel that, the warmth?" Sarah stared at her, eyes wide with alarm. "Mrs. Thompson, please, calm down." "No, I mean it. I can feel something." Sarah hurried to her side, crouching next to the wheelchair, her face pale. "What do you mean, feel?" Margaret didn't answer. Her hands were gripping the armrests so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Tears welled in her eyes as she stared down at her lap, at the motionless legs beneath the blanket. It couldn't be real. It shouldn't be real. And yet, the warmth grew, spreading like liquid light through her lower body. She hadn't felt heat, pressure, or weight in 15 years. But now it was as though the sleeping parts of her had started whispering back. "Emma," she choked out, "what's happening?" The child's voice was calm, steady, far too old for her small frame. "They remember," she said. "They're just confused. You've been sad for so long that your body forgot how to listen. But now it's starting to— Wake up!" Margaret's tears spilled freely now. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "This isn't possible. This isn't—" Her words broke as another wave of warmth surged through her legs, stronger, pulsing like a heartbeat. Sarah reached forward, placing a protective arm around Emma. "Stop, sweetheart, please," she said, panic in her voice. "You're scaring her." But Emma didn't stop. "It's okay, Mommy," she murmured. "She's not scared. She's remembering." Sarah looked at Margaret and froze. For the first time in all the months she'd cared for her, there was color in Margaret's face. Her eyes were wide, bright, alive. She wasn't looking at Emma or Sarah anymore. She was staring down, waiting, terrified to believe, desperate not to stop. Then it happened, the faintest twitch beneath the blanket. Margaret's entire body went still. She didn't breathe. Neither did Sarah. "Did you see that?" Margaret whispered. "My foot. Did you see it?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I don't know what I saw." But Margaret knew. Her body knew. Her voice cracked with a sob that came from somewhere deep, somewhere long buried. "Oh my God," she cried. "Oh my God, I felt it. I felt it." Emma opened her eyes then, her cheeks flushed, her small hands still resting on Margaret's legs. "See," she said gently. "They're waking up. They've just been asleep for too long." Sarah rose slowly to her feet, her hand trembling as she reached for the phone. I need to call Dr. Hayes, she whispered. This can't be happening. Someone needs to see this. No, Margaret said sharply, surprising both of them with the strength in her voice. No one calls anyone. Sarah turned toward her, startled. Mrs. Thompson. No, she repeated. Not yet. Not until I understand what this is. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the fire crackling and Margaret's uneven breathing. She could still feel the warmth, the tingling, like sunlight moving through her veins. Emma finally stepped back, her face pale but calm. You'll feel tired later, she said softly. When the sleeping parts wake up, they make the rest of you sleepy too. Margaret gave a shaky laugh, tears still streaking her face. You're full of mysteries, aren't you, little one? Emma smiled faintly. No, just memories. And then, it happened. A sudden, sharp sound tore through the quiet, the heavy slam of the front door reverberating through the marble hall. The air in the room shifted. Sarah spun around, her face going white. Margaret froze, her heart pounding as the echo of footsteps filled the foyer. As the warmth in her legs turned to electric tingling, the door burst open, and the one person who stood to lose everything from her miracle had arrived. Some people fear miracles, especially when they threaten their inheritance. The sound of the front door slamming echoed through the marble halls like a gunshot, shattering the fragile peace that had filled the mansion moments before. The warmth in Margaret's legs, that impossible new sensation, seemed to recoil as a voice, sharp, entitled, and unmistakable, cut through the air. Aunt Maggie, what the hell is going on here? James Thompson's footsteps were heavy and fast, his tone that of a man who owned every room he walked into. His shadow appeared first in the doorway, long and harsh against the golden firelight, followed by the man himself. Expensive suit slightly wrinkled, hair slicked back, expression twisted with suspicion. He had his father's jawline and his mother's arrogance, and both were sharpened by greed. James, Margaret said quietly, her hands tightening around the armrests of her wheelchair. What are you doing here? What am I doing here? He laughed coldly, spreading his arms. I could ask you the same thing, Aunt Maggie. I get a call from the house staff saying you're letting strangers into the mansion. With a child. He looked at Sarah and Emma as though they were insects. And now I walk in to find this performance. Sarah instinctively stepped in front of her daughter. Mr. Thompson, I assure you. Don't, he snapped. I know your type. I've seen it 1,000 times. You find a lonely old woman with too much money and too little family, and you start weaving your little sob story until she starts signing checks. James. Margaret's voice cracked like thunder through the room, louder and stronger than he had ever heard it. That's enough. He blinked, momentarily thrown off by the force behind her tone. For a fleeting moment, the confident young heir looked like a scolded child. But then his smirk returned. I see, he said slowly, eyes narrowing. So this is your new project? Letting con artists into the house? What's next? Seances in the ballroom? Sarah's face flushed. I would never— Oh, I'm sure you wouldn't, James interrupted. But it's convenient, isn't it? Bringing your daughter along. Let the sweet, innocent little girl earn my aunt's trust, and before long, you'll be living off her estate. Emma's voice, when it came, was soft, but it carried across the room with eerie clarity. You're scared, she said simply. The words hung there, slicing through the tension like a blade. James turned toward her, startled. What did you just say? You're scared, Emma repeated, her blue eyes, bright and unblinking, fixed on him with unsettling calm. But not of us. The firelight flickered, casting moving shadows across her face. She looked impossibly small, standing in front of him, but there was something in her stillness that made the grown man take a half-step back before he caught himself. James forced a laugh, but it rang hollow. Scared? Of what? Of a child who thinks she's some kind of faith healer? Emma didn't answer right away. She simply watched him, her gaze unwavering. You're scared because if I'm telling the truth, she said softly, then everything you've been waiting for disappears. His jaw tightened. What are you talking about? You want her to stay broken, Emma said. You want her to stay sick, because if she gets better, she doesn't need you anymore. The silence that followed was suffocating. The ticking clock on the mantel seemed suddenly deafening. Sarah reached out to pull her daughter back, but Margaret spoke first, her voice trembling, not with fear, but with fury. Emma, she said gently, that's enough. But when she looked at her nephew, her eyes were different, sharp, alive, and cold as the snow outside. Though I can't say she's wrong, she added quietly. James's face went pale. Aunt Maggie, you don't actually believe this nonsense. I believe, she interrupted, that you've forgotten your place. The words hit him harder than she expected. For years, Margaret had spoken to him with weary patience, always bending, always tolerating his arrogance. But tonight, something in her tone made him falter. He took a step forward, his voice rising. I'm just trying to protect you. These people, this child could be dangerous. Protect me? Margaret's laugh was low, incredulous. You've spent your entire life protecting only one thing, James, your inheritance. He froze. Margaret turned her wheelchair slightly, facing him fully now, and for the first time in years she felt a spark of power, not in her legs, but in her voice, her presence, her will. You forget, she said slowly, that this house, this company, this fortune, all of it is mine. And I will not be dictated to by a boy who measures love in dollar signs. The silence that followed was absolute. Emma stood quietly beside her mother, watching. Sarah's hand trembled as she gripped her daughter's shoulder, torn between fear and awe. James's nostrils flared. You're not thinking straight, he said finally, his tone low and venomous. You're letting them fill your head with fantasies. You're not... Well, I'll be calling Dr. Hayes in the morning. Do that, Margaret said evenly. And tell him to bring a witness. Because if what happened tonight can be explained by science, then by all means, let him explain it. But until then, she turned her head slightly, her eyes blazing. You will speak to me with respect in my own home. For a moment, James said nothing. His face was red, his jaw tight. He looked from his aunt to the child, and for the first time, Margaret saw fear flicker behind his anger. Without another word, he turned and stormed out, his footsteps echoing down the hall. The front door slammed behind him, shaking the chandeliers. The silence that followed was heavy, broken, only by the soft crackle of the fire. Margaret exhaled slowly. Her hands were trembling, but not from weakness. For years she had felt like a ghost in her own life, powerless, voiceless, invisible. But tonight, she had stood up for something, for someone, and the feeling filled her with a strength she had almost forgotten existed. Emma's small hand found hers. You stood up, Mrs. Thompson, she said softly. Even before your legs did. Margaret looked down at her, tears glinting in her eyes. Maybe I did, she whispered. Maybe I finally did. That night, long after Sarah and Emma had gone to bed, the snow began to fall again, soft, relentless, endless. Margaret lay awake in her room, staring at the ceiling, her mind a storm of disbelief and wonder. And then she felt it, faint, unmistakable, impossible, a tingling, deep in her legs, alive. As the snow fell in a hushed world outside, Margaret realized she wasn't just dreaming of walking again. Her body was remembering how. The human heart doesn't lie, and hers was whispering that something impossible had begun. The first thing Margaret Thompson felt that morning was warmth, real warmth, radiating from the place she had long believed dead. For 15 years, she had awakened to the same cruel silence in her body. Nothing but stillness below her waist, a void where life used to hum. But now, as the pale light of dawn spilled across the curtains, she felt something else. Faint, fluttering, alive. For a long moment she lay perfectly still, afraid that moving would break the spell. The fire from the night before had burned out, and the room was cold, yet her legs felt as though sunlight lived inside them. When she finally dared to shift, a strange, almost electric tingling coursed through her muscles, awkward, clumsy, but undeniably there. She gasped aloud, covering her mouth with both hands as tears gathered in her eyes. She hadn't cried in years. The kind of grief she carried had hardened her against it. But this was different. These weren't tears of loss. They were tears of awakening. Her mind rebelled, searching for logic. It's a dream. It's nerves misfiring. It's impossible. But another voice, quieter and far older, whispered back, "You know it isn't." Margaret stared toward the window where the December morning was painting silver light across the frost. The memory of the night before replayed in her mind like something out of a dream. The small girl, her golden curls, the impossible heat of her touch, the first twitch of movement beneath the blanket, and then James's angry voice cutting through it all, breaking the moment like glass. But none of that mattered now, because something had changed. She pressed her palms to her thighs. They felt warm. The sensation wasn't perfect. It was faint, distant, like hearing music through a wall. But it was there. For 15 years, her body had been a stranger. Now it was whispering hello again. A knock came at the door. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson," Sarah called gently. "May I come in?" Margaret blinked rapidly, wiping her face with the edge of her blanket. "Yes, Sarah, please." The young nurse entered with her usual bright smile and a breakfast tray in her hands. But the moment she saw Margaret sitting up straighter, her face changed. "Are you all right? You look different," Margaret finished softly. "I feel different." Sarah set the tray down on the bedside table. "Different how?" Margaret hesitated, her voice trembling. "I can feel my legs." Sarah froze mid-step. "I'm sorry, what?" Margaret laughed weakly, shaking her head as if she still couldn't believe it herself. "Last night, when Emma touched me, I thought it was imagination. But this morning I woke up and I could feel them. Not perfectly, not fully, but enough to know it's real." Sarah's lips parted in shock, her hands rising instinctively to her chest. That's impossible." "Yes," Margaret whispered, her eyes glistening. "That's what I've told myself for 15 years. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The room seemed to hum with quiet disbelief. Finally, Margaret looked up at her nurse, her expression shifting from wonder to something deeper. Curiosity mixed with fear. "Sarah, what is she?" Sarah blinked. "Emma?" "Yes. Last night wasn't chance. You said it before. She's done things like this, hasn't she?" Sarah sat slowly in the chair beside the bed, her professional composure cracking. "I wasn't going to tell you. Most people wouldn't believe me. Honestly, I wouldn't have believed it myself if I hadn't seen it again and again." Margaret leaned forward, her eyes locked on hers. "Tell me everything." Sarah took a shaky breath. "She's been different since she was 3. I thought it was just a child's imagination at first. She'd touch wilted flowers, and they'd bloom again. Sick pets in the neighborhood would get better overnight. Once, our neighbor's dog was hit by a car. The vet said there was no hope, but Emma sat beside it for hours. By morning, the dog was walking." Margaret listened, spellbound. "I told myself it was coincidence," Sarah continued, her voice trembling. "Until it kept happening. It's like she feels what's broken, not just in bodies, but in hearts. Sometimes she says things she shouldn't possibly know. When she was 6, she told our landlord that his wife's cancer had come back. And it had. He found out a week later." Margaret shivered, the chill of awe crawling up her spine. "And you've never told anyone?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Would you? If your child could do something that the world wouldn't understand? I've spent her whole life hiding it, moving from place to place whenever people started to notice." She looked down at her, trembling hands. "Because if the wrong people find out, They'll take her away from me. They'll turn her into something she isn't, a specimen, a miracle to be studied, or worse. Margaret felt a deep ache in her chest, the kind only a mother's fear could summon. You've been protecting her all this time. Sarah nodded. And now I've failed. Because last night, something changed. Whatever she did for you, it was stronger than anything I've seen before. If anyone finds out, they won't, Margaret said quickly. Not from me. Before Sarah could reply, a knock came at the half-open door, followed by a bright, cheerful voice. Good morning? Emma stood there, her golden curls bouncing as she ran into the room. Her red coat had been replaced by a yellow dress that made her look like sunlight personified. How do your legs feel today, Mrs. Thompson? She asked, climbing onto the chair beside her nurse's mother. Margaret smiled, despite the tremor in her heart. Tingly, as if they're trying to remember something. Emma clapped her hands, beaming. That's perfect. It means the sleepy parts are waking up faster now. Sarah managed a nervous laugh. Sweetheart, maybe let Mrs. Thompson rest a bit. But she's getting better, Emma insisted, her small hands waving with excitement. I can feel it. Her legs aren't sad anymore. They're starting to talk to each other again. Margaret chuckled softly, her eyes glistening. You have a strange way of saying things, Emma. It's just how it works, Emma said matter-of-factly. Then her tone softened. You're going to walk again soon. I can tell. Before Margaret could respond, the distant sound of tires crunching over snow drew all their eyes towards the window. Outside, a black sedan was pulling up the circular driveway. The Thompson family crest gleamed on its hood, and a familiar figure stepped out, tall, dignified, carrying a leather doctor's bag. Dr. Hayes, Margaret murmured. Sarah's face drained of color. Oh no, he can't find out about this, not yet. Margaret's heart pounded. He's been my physician for 10 years, Sarah. He'll notice something's different. Emma had gone still, her bright expression dimming as she stared through the frosted glass. What is it, sweetheart? Margaret asked softly. Emma's voice came in a whisper, quiet, steady but cold enough to still the room. He's sick inside too, she said, but he doesn't know it yet. As the doctor's shadow crossed the snow toward the door, Margaret felt her miracle collide with a new kind of fear, one that had nothing to do with herself. He came to check her pulse, but ended up questioning everything he believed in. The knock on the grand oak door carried its usual rhythm, firm, professional, familiar. For 15 years, that sound had been the prelude to the same ritual. Polite questions, polite silences, polite hopelessness. But this morning, Margaret Thompson's world was not the same, and neither was she. Sarah opened the door, forcing a calm smile. Good morning, Dr. Hayes, she greeted, though her hands trembled slightly. Dr. Robert Hayes stepped into the marble foyer, shaking the snow from his coat. He was a tall man in his early 60s, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. He carried himself like a man who believed in order, logic, and things that could be explained, a belief that was about to be shattered. Sarah, he said warmly, how's our patient doing today? Any new complaints? Before she could answer, Margaret's voice called out from the sitting room, steadier than usual and alive with something new. No complaints, Robert, just surprises. Dr. Hayes turned, his brow furrowing. He'd known Margaret for years, through loss, through surgery, through the long decline of hope. But today, there was something in her tone that made him pause. He stepped into the room and froze. Margaret sat by the window, bathed in pale morning light. Her cheeks held color, her eyes shimmered with something he hadn't seen in them since before the accident. Vitality. Even her posture was different. Well, he said cautiously, setting his bag down. You look better than usual. I am better than usual, she said with a mysterious smile. Sarah stood behind her, visibly tense. Dr. Hayes, she began, before you... But Emma's voice interrupted, soft and curious. Hi, You're the doctor." Dr. Hayes blinked, noticing the little girl for the first time, standing beside the fireplace in a pale blue dress, golden curls glowing in the light. "And who might you be?" "I'm Emma," she said simply. "I help people." He chuckled. "Do you now? Well, that's good to hear. The world needs more helpers." Emma tilted her head. "You're sick," she said matter-of-factly. The words hit like a stone dropped into silence. Dr. Hayes straightened, his expression freezing. "Excuse me?" "In here." Emma pointed to his abdomen, just below his ribs. "It's not big yet, but it hurts sometimes, doesn't it? Especially when you eat too fast." Sarah went pale. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. Dr. Hayes stared at the child, his mind scrambling for footing. "What did you just say?" Emma didn't flinch. "You have something growing inside that doesn't belong there. But it's still small. You can stop it before it gets worse." For a moment, he couldn't breathe. Because the girl was right. For months, he'd ignored the dull ache that came and went after meals. He'd blamed it on stress, bad diet, getting older. Last week, he'd finally scheduled a scan no one knew about, to rule out something minor. But how could this child possibly know? "Now wait a minute," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That's quite an imagination you've got there, young lady." Emma only looked at him with calm patience. "It's not imagination. It's just what I feel." Dr. Hayes turned toward Margaret. "What's going on here?" "Something you won't believe," she said softly. "Not until you see it." He frowned, taking out his stethoscope. "Let's start with your checkup, shall we?" Margaret nodded, her heartbeat thudding with anticipation. As he listened to her chest, checked her pulse, and tested her blood pressure, his professional routine reasserted itself, measured, controlled, clinical. But his mind kept circling back to the little girl watching quietly from the corner. Finally, he straightened. "Everything looks stable. Frankly, Margaret, better than usual. Have you changed anything in your treatment plan?" "You could say that," she murmured. Sarah hesitated. "Doctor, last night something happened." Dr. Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Something?" Emma stepped closer, her small hand reaching out. "Can I show you?" He chuckled nervously. "Show me what?" "How I help." Sarah's eyes widened. "Emma, no." But before anyone could stop her, the child reached out and touched his hand. The warmth was immediate, startling, intense, not like human touch at all. It spread from her small palm into his, radiating upward through his arm, then settling deep in his abdomen, right where that quiet ache had been living. For a heartbeat, he thought it was imagination. But then, the pain that had become so familiar, that dull, constant reminder of something wrong, simply vanished. He pulled his hand back sharply, staring at her as if she'd burned him. "What did you just do?" Emma shrugged lightly. "I told it to stop hurting." Dr. Hayes stepped back, unsteady. "That's not possible." "Neither was this," Margaret said softly, pulling back the blanket that covered her legs. "Until last night." He turned toward her, still dazed. "What are you talking about?" "Watch," she said simply. "Sarah, will you hand him the reflex hammer?" Sarah hesitated, then obeyed. Dr. Hayes knelt beside her wheelchair, the same way he had 100 times before, and tapped gently at her knee. "Nothing." He sighed. "You know this is pointless." "Try again," Margaret whispered. He did. And this time, impossibly, her leg twitched. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was real. Dr. Hayes froze. His hand trembled as he tapped again. This time the movement was stronger, a reflex that by all medical reasoning could not exist. "My God," he breathed. "Margaret, your spinal cord was completely severed. There's no way." "I told you," she whispered through tears. "Something happened. She touched me, and I felt it." He looked up at Emma. The child now standing quietly beside him, her blue eyes impossibly calm. This defies everything I know about neurology," he muttered, rising to his feet. "There's no precedent, no explanation. Maybe not everything can be explained, Margaret said gently. For a long moment, no one spoke. The room pulsed with something deeper than words. Disbelief, awe, fear, and hope all tangled together. Dr. Hayes ran a trembling hand through his hair. Margaret, if this is real, if this can be replicated, it changes everything. I need to document this. I need to— No, Sarah interrupted sharply. You can't. If people find out about her, they'll take her away. You know what they'll do, Doctor. They'll turn her into an experiment. He looked from Sarah to Emma to Margaret, torn between his oath as a physician and the awe of a man standing at the edge of a miracle. Finally, he exhaled. Then maybe, for now, this stays between us. Margaret nodded. For now. They didn't notice the faint shadow by the hallway door, or the glint of a phone camera, its red recording light blinking. James Thompson stood just outside, holding his phone close, a slow, calculating smile curving his lips. While inside a miracle was being born, outside, greed was already recording its price. Miracles attract attention, and greed never misses an opportunity. The world outside the Thompson mansion was still white and silent, blanketed by a December snow that glittered like a secret too beautiful to last. Inside, the atmosphere had changed completely. Where there had once been the constant hum of loneliness, now there was laughter, soft music, and life returning to rooms that had forgotten what warmth felt like. Every morning, Emma would sit beside Margaret's wheelchair, her small hands resting gently on Margaret's legs as sunlight spilled through the tall windows. The sessions were quiet, almost sacred. Sometimes, the only sound was the faint crackle of the fireplace, and Emma's soft humming as she worked, a melody that somehow seemed to sync with the rhythm of Margaret's breathing. Each day, the impossible became a little more ordinary. Margaret could now move her toes. Then, she began to flex her ankles. A week later, she stood with Sarah and Dr. Hayes supporting her, tears streaming down her cheeks as her body remembered what balance felt like. It's like teaching a newborn how to walk, Dr. Hayes whispered, awestruck. Only the newborn already remembers how. Emma just smiled. The sleepy parts are learning faster now, she said. They're happy again. Sarah would watch her daughter with both pride and fear, her heart caught between two worlds, the miracle unfolding in front of her and the growing terror of what it meant. Because miracles, she knew, didn't stay hidden for long. In another part of the mansion, hidden away behind the heavy oak doors of his late uncle's old office, James Thompson was on his third phone call of the day. The room smelled faintly of brandy and ambition. I'm telling you, it's real, he hissed into the phone. My aunt's been paralyzed for 15 years. Now she's standing, walking. And there's this kid, 8 years old, doing something to her. You want a story? This is it. A medical miracle. The voice on the other end crackled with interest. Are you saying the girl has healing powers? I'm saying whatever she's doing, it's not natural, James replied, his tone sharp with greed. And if your people don't move fast, someone else will. I've got video proof. A pause. Then, you'll be compensated for your cooperation, of course. James smiled. That's what I was counting on. He hung up and leaned back in the leather chair, satisfaction spreading through him like poison. For years, he'd been waiting for his inheritance to fall neatly into his lap, waiting for his frail, wheelchair-bound aunt to fade away. But now, everything had changed. The woman who had been dependent, predictable, and pliant was suddenly alive, strong, and surrounded by new people who had no business in her life. If she lived longer, if she regained her independence, his financial future would crumble. So he did what men like him always did when faced with a miracle. He found a way to turn it into profit. Downstairs, unaware of the betrayal already in motion, Dr. Hayes was carefully setting up equipment in the drawing room. He had become their quiet ally, no longer the skeptic, but a scientist driven by awe. This is purely for documentation, he told Margaret as he attached electrodes gently to her legs. "If anyone ever questions this, we'll have proof. Real data." "I trust you," she said softly. "But Robert, promise me something. No one sees this unless I say so." He hesitated, then nodded. "You have my word." Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, watching curiously as wires and monitors blinked to life. "You want to see how the sleepy parts talk?" she asked with innocent excitement. Dr. Hayes smiled faintly. Something like that. When Emma placed her hands on Margaret's thighs, the machines responded instantly. Lights danced, signals spiked, proof that the dormant neural pathways were somehow firing again. Dr. Hayes stared at the readings, speechless. This is rewriting neurology," he murmured. "If this gets out," Sarah's voice cut in sharply. "That's exactly why it can't get out." Her tone carried an edge of fear, one that made everyone in the room fall silent. "Do you understand what they'd do to her if they found out? She's just a child. They'd take her away, study her, lock her in some lab until they figured out how to copy her." Emma looked up at her mother, her small brow furrowed. "I don't want to go anywhere else. I want to stay here. Mrs. Thompson still needs me." Margaret reached for her hand, her eyes full of warmth. "And I still need you, darling. More than you know." For a moment, the fear eased. They were a strange little family now. A grieving widow, a weary nurse, a miraculous child, and a doctor whose world had been turned inside out. Against all reason, they had found something pure, something sacred. But miracles have a way of drawing the wrong kind of light. It began with phone calls, then came letters. Then, a week later, a feature request from a national health journal. A medical research institute in Maryland reached out on behalf of the Department of Health, seeking verification of an unregistered experimental recovery. Then, Dr. Hayes's phone began ringing with unknown numbers. "What did you tell anyone?" Margaret demanded one evening, panic rising in her chest. "Nothing," he insisted. "I swear I haven't shared my findings with anyone." But he looked uneasy, because someone had. The next morning, Margaret awoke to find 2 reporters parked at the edge of her long driveway, their cameras glinting in the cold light. By afternoon, an unmarked black sedan appeared, idling near the gates. Sarah tried to remain calm, but her hands trembled as she drew the curtains. "They know," she whispered. "Someone told them." Margaret's heart sank. "James?" Even saying his name left a bitter taste in her mouth. That evening, Dr. Hayes confronted him in the study. "You leaked it," he said quietly. James didn't deny it. He leaned casually against the desk, smirking. "You're welcome. The world deserves to know about this, Doctor. Or are you planning to keep a miracle locked away in this mausoleum?" "You don't understand what you've done," Dr. Hayes said, his voice rising. "You've set things in motion that can't be stopped." James shrugged. "Progress can't be stopped, Doctor, and neither can profit." Dr. Hayes left the room shaking, his stomach knotted with dread. The next morning dawned gray and still. Margaret awoke to a sound she didn't recognize at first, the low hum of engines. When she pulled back the curtain, her heart nearly stopped. Down the long circular driveway, a convoy of black SUVs was pulling up, tires crunching over the frozen gravel. Men and women in dark coats stepped out, badges flashing, voices sharp and official. Sarah rushed into the room, clutching Emma close. "They're here," she whispered, her face ashen. "Oh my God, Margaret! They're here!" Margaret looked out the window again, her breath fogging the glass. For the first time in years, her legs didn't feel like the weakest part of her body. They felt ready. As the agents approached the front door, Margaret whispered to herself, "They can take my fortune if they must, but not the child who gave me back my life." They came for a child, not realizing they were about to face a miracle. The Thompson mansion had weathered snowstorms, scandals, and sorrow, but never an invasion. That morning, it stood, silent and gleaming in the pale winter light, unaware that its peace was about to be shattered. It began with the sound of engines, dozens of them. The low, synchronized growl of black SUVs winding up the driveway like a column of steel serpents. Inside, Margaret froze. Sarah was in the living room, reading to Emma when the sound reached them. She stopped mid-sentence, the color draining from her face. "Stay here," she whispered, her voice trembling as she rose. But Emma didn't move. She sat perfectly still, her blue eyes distant, listening to something no one else could hear. "They're not just visitors," she said softly. "They're angry and scared." Before Sarah could respond, a thunderous knock rattled the front doors, then another. Then, without waiting, they swung open. Men in black coats and badges spilled into the marble foyer, followed by stern-faced officials carrying clipboards. At their head was a tall man with sharp features and an arrogance that clung to him like cologne. "Mrs. Margaret Thompson?" he demanded. "I'm Dr. Marcus Reinhold with the National Institute of Health, accompanied by representatives from Child Protective Services and Federal Medical Oversight." Behind him, James Thompson appeared, looking far too calm for the chaos he had unleashed. His smirk was polished, professional, the smile of a man who thought he was doing the right thing while lining his own pockets. "Uncle Charles would have wanted this," he said smugly. "Aunt Maggie's being manipulated by these people, by that child." Margaret wheeled forward, her voice calm but firm. "James," she said evenly, "you have no right to be here." "I have every right," he shot back. "You're my family, and you're being taken advantage of." Dr. Reinhold gestured to the agents. "We're here to ensure everyone's safety. We've received credible reports of a minor performing unlicensed medical activity and possible psychological coercion of an elderly patient." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Psychological coercion? Are you insane?" "We're well within our authority," Reinhold said smoothly, ignoring her outrage. "Where is the child?" Emma stepped forward before anyone could stop her. She was wearing a white dress with small golden flowers embroidered across the hem, delicate, innocent, glowing against the cold marble floor. "I'm right here," she said softly. The room seemed to still at her voice. Even the agents hesitated. Something about her calmness, her absolute lack of fear, unsettled them. Reinhold crouched slightly, attempting the patronizing tone adults use when speaking to children. "Sweetheart, we're here to make sure you're safe. You've been helping people, haven't you?" "Yes," Emma said, "but you don't believe me." Reinhold's smile faltered. "Why don't you tell us what you've been doing?" "I help people who are broken," Emma replied, simply. "Sometimes their bodies, sometimes their hearts." A murmur rippled through the room. One of the agents snorted softly. "She's rehearsed," he muttered. Reinhold straightened. "Mrs. Collins," he said sharply to Sarah, "do you understand the gravity of what you've done? Allowing your daughter to engage in— "In what?" Sarah snapped. "Kindness? Healing? My daughter hasn't hurt anyone." "You're exploiting her," he accused. "Perhaps not intentionally, but emotionally. A child shouldn't carry the burden of false hope." "I'm not carrying anything heavy," Emma interrupted, her voice calm but piercing. "Except the truth." Reinhold blinked, momentarily speechless. "Excuse me?" Emma stepped closer, her small boots clicking against the marble floor. She looked up at him with eyes that seemed far too knowing. "You're scared. Not of me, of what I make you feel." Reinhold's face drained of color. Behind him, James shifted uncomfortably. "For God's sake, this is exactly what I mean," he barked. "This child is manipulative." Margaret's voice cut through the air, sharp as ice. "Enough." The command carried weight, the voice of a woman who had once led corporations, commanded boardrooms, and shaped destinies. Everyone turned toward her. "I've sat in this chair for 15 years, she said evenly. "I've listened to doctors, scientists, men with degrees and no empathy, tell me what's possible and what isn't. And not one of them ever gave me what that little girl did. Hope." Her tone grew stronger with each word. "You talk about science, but what you're really afraid of is wonder. Because if she's real, then everything you've built your lives on, every rule, every limitation, begins to crack. Dr. Hayes, who had arrived moments earlier, stepped forward. "Gentlemen, I'm a physician," he said calmly, "and I've witnessed what this child can do firsthand. Mrs. Thompson's reflexes have returned. I've documented it. This isn't a scam or a delusion." Reinhold's expression tightened. "If that's true, then it's all the more reason to bring her in for study." "You're not taking her," Margaret said coldly. "Mrs. Thompson," the CPS officer interjected, "this is a matter of federal jurisdiction. If there's even a chance this child's safety is compromised—" "She's safer here than she'll ever be with you," Margaret interrupted. "And if you think you can walk into my home and dictate what happens under my roof, you've mistaken me for someone fragile." Her words rang through the mansion like a bell. For a long moment, no one moved. Finally, Reinhold nodded to the agents. "We'll leave for now, but we'll be back, with authorization. This situation is far from over." James opened his mouth to gloat, but Margaret silenced him with a single look. "If you ever step foot in this house, again without my permission, James, you'll regret it." He faltered, not because of her words, but because of her stance. She wasn't sitting anymore. She was standing, supported only by the back of her chair, her legs trembling but solid beneath her. The agents hesitated, visibly shaken. Then they turned and filed out, followed by Reinhold's cold glare and James's defeated pride. When the last car disappeared down the snowy drive, silence reclaimed the mansion. Sarah collapsed onto the sofa, trembling. "They'll come back," she whispered. "You know they will." Emma stood beside Margaret, her small hand slipping into the older woman's. Her voice was calm, quiet, and full of certainty. "They'll come back," she said softly. "But next time they'll have orders." Margaret looked toward the door, her newfound strength turning to steel. "Then we'll be ready. Sometimes you have to walk through fear before you can walk at all." The wind outside the Thompson mansion screamed against the windows like a warning. Snow fell thick and relentless, smothering the world in silence. The kind of silence that feels like the pause before something irreversible happens. Dr. Hayes stood near the fireplace, his face pale beneath the flickering light. His hands, once steady from decades of medical work, trembled slightly as he folded a document and set it on the table. "They'll be back by morning," he said quietly. "Reinhold won't wait for another round of negotiations. Once the authorization is signed, they'll come with federal orders and armed escorts. 12 hours, at most." Margaret stared into the fire, her fingers tightening around the armrests of her wheelchair. For 15 years, fear had defined her life. Fear of movement, of pain, of hope. But now fear looked different. It wasn't about walking anymore. It was about losing the one person who had made her believe she could. "We can run," Sarah said suddenly. Her voice was sharp with panic. "Pack the car, drive through the storm, disappear before they get here. I've done it before. I know how to vanish." Margaret turned toward her, calm but resolute. "They'd find us. You said it yourself. You've been hiding for years, Sarah, and they always catch up. This time we stand." Sarah shook her head. "You don't understand. They'll take her. They'll take my little girl and call it science." Emma, sitting quietly by the window, looked up. "They can't take me if I'm not scared," she said softly. "And I'm not scared anymore." The fire crackled. Snow drifted across the tall windows, glowing orange from the flames inside. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, Margaret reached for Emma's hand. "You said the sleepy parts are almost awake. What happens if you finish?" Emma tilted her head, her curls shimmering in the firelight. "Then you'll walk again. Really walk, not just a few steps. But it has to be tonight." Dr. Hayes frowned. "Why tonight?" "Because tomorrow is too late," Emma said simply. "When they come back, they'll want to take me away. And if I don't finish helping Mrs. Thompson before that happens, her legs might fall asleep again forever." Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of truth. Margaret's eyes filled with quiet determination. "Then we finish it tonight." Sarah looked between them, torn between terror and love. "Emma, it's too dangerous. You've never done this much before. You don't even know what it'll do to you." Emma smiled faintly. "I'll be okay, Mommy. You always tell me to help people when I can, and Mrs. Thompson needs me." The clock on the mantel chimed 9. Outside, the snow deepened. The mansion was cut off from the world, the driveways buried under white silence. Inside, the glow of the fire made the room feel almost holy, a cathedral of courage, built from fear, faith, and the faint hum of something greater. Dr. Hayes checked the monitors he had set up days earlier: heart rate, neural activity, oxygen levels. The screens flickered softly in the corner like stars. "If we're doing this," he said quietly, "we'll do it right. I'll monitor her vitals. If anything looks dangerous, we stop immediately." Margaret smiled. "You'll try to stop us, Robert. But you won't." He didn't argue. At 11:45 p.m., the storm reached its peak. Wind howled through the chimneys, rattling the mansion like an old memory refusing to fade. Sarah sat beside her daughter, brushing a hand through Emma's golden curls. "You're sure?" she whispered. Emma nodded. "It's time." Margaret sat upright in her wheelchair, her breath coming fast. Her legs tingled with a heat that had been building for days. She could feel something deep inside her body, something that had been locked away for 15 long years, begin to stir. Dr. Hayes adjusted the sensors on her legs. "Everything's ready," he said softly. Emma stood, her small figure illuminated by the warm firelight. The snow outside turned the windows into glowing mirrors, reflecting the impossible scene about to unfold. She took Margaret's hands in hers, her blue eyes full of calm power. "Close your eyes," she said gently. Margaret obeyed. "Now remember what it felt like to run through the garden. Remember the air on your face. Remember the sound of your husband laughing beside you. Remember what it felt like to live." The warmth began instantly, not a gentle heat this time, but something deeper, electric, alive. It rushed through her body, into her spine, down into the sleeping nerves that had lain still for so long. "Oh God," Margaret gasped. "I can feel it. It's like lightning." Dr. Hayes's monitors lit up, neural activity off the charts, reflexes firing faster than he could measure. "Stay with it," he said, his voice trembling. Emma's eyes were closed now, her face pale but serene. The air around them seemed to hum. Soft at first, then louder, like the resonance of invisible strings. Sarah clutched her chair, tears streaming silently down her face. The warmth in Margaret's legs grew brighter, until she could no longer tell where the pain ended and the power began. Every nerve screamed awake, every cell remembered what it was meant to do. And then, the world seemed to hold its breath. Emma opened her eyes. "Stand up," she whispered. Margaret hesitated, trembling. "Trust me," Emma said again, her voice almost glowing. Margaret braced her hands against the arms of the wheelchair. The muscles in her thighs contracted, weak at first, then stronger. For the first time in 15 years, her body responded to her will. Dr. Hayes held his breath. Sarah covered her mouth. And slowly, shakily, Margaret Thompson rose to her feet. Her knees buckled, then straightened. Her arms shook as she found her balance. She looked down at her own legs as though seeing them for the first time. "I'm standing," she whispered. Then louder, stronger. "I'm standing." Sarah let out a sob of pure disbelief. Dr. Hayes pressed a trembling hand to his mouth. Emma smiled faintly, her voice soft but sure. "I told you the sleepy parts just needed to remember." Margaret laughed, a sound that hadn't existed in her home for years. The fire roared higher, the snow outside swirling in wild celebration. But before the miracle could settle into peace, the sound of splintering wood shattered it. The front doors crashed open. Wind and snow exploded through the hallway as men in dark coats and badges poured inside. Sarah screamed. Dr. Hayes jumped to shield Emma. Margaret stumbled forward on unsteady legs, her body instinctively placing itself between the child and the oncoming chaos. Flashlights cut through the air, voices barked orders, and as armed agents swarmed the house, Emma looked up at Margaret and whispered, almost serenely, "It's okay. I finished just in time." She finally stood, not to walk away, but to protect the child who gave her back her life. For a moment, the world was nothing but noise. Boots slamming against marble, shouts echoing through the grand halls, flashlights slicing through the storm-dark air. But in the center of it all, amidst the chaos and disbelief, Margaret Thompson stood. No wheelchair, no trembling shadow of the woman she had been. Just strength, fragile, newly born, but burning like fire through her veins. The agents surged into the room, led by Dr. Marcus Reinhold, his coat flapping, his expression lit with the feverish gleam of scientific obsession. Behind him, James Thompson followed, wide-eyed and pale, as if even he hadn't expected things to escalate this far. "Step aside, Mrs. Thompson," an agent barked, raising a gloved hand. "We have orders to detain the minor and her guardian for questioning under federal AOI's medical protocol." "No," Margaret said, her voice firm, ringing with authority. "You'll have to go through me first." The agents hesitated, not because of her words, but because of what they were seeing. The woman who was supposed to be paralyzed was standing, her back straight, her eyes blazing. Even Dr. Reinhold stopped in his tracks, shock flickering briefly across his sharp features. "My God," he whispered. "It's true." Emma lay slumped in Sarah's arms near the fireplace, her small body limp, her face ghostly pale. The child looked impossibly fragile, like a candle that had burned too bright, too long. Dr. Hayes knelt beside her, checking her pulse. "She's alive," he said, his voice tight with relief. "Just unconscious. Whatever she did tonight, it drained everything out of her." Sarah clutched her daughter close, her tears falling onto Emma's golden curls. "You can't take her," she choked out. "You can't have her." Dr. Reinhold's eyes never left Emma. "Mrs. Collins, your daughter has just performed what appears to be a complete spinal nerve restoration, something no human being has ever achieved. She's not just a child anymore. She's the single most important medical discovery in history." Margaret's voice cut through his fervor like a blade. "She's not a discovery. She's a little girl." Reinhold turned toward her, his composure returning in waves of cold calculation. "Mrs. Thompson, I understand your emotional attachment, but this transcends personal feeling. You're walking because of her. Imagine how many others could walk. How many diseases could be cured if we understood how she does this." "You don't want to understand her," Margaret said coldly. "You want to own her." Reinhold's jaw tightened. "I'm offering salvation, not ownership. This child's abilities could revolutionize humanity." "Or destroy it," Margaret interrupted. "Because the moment men like you get involved, miracles become weapons." For a moment, the two of them locked eyes, the healed and the hunter, each recognizing the other's conviction. Then Emma stirred weakly in Sarah's arms. Her small hand lifted toward Reinhold. "You shouldn't talk so loud," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The angry sickness inside your head doesn't like it." The entire room froze. Reinhold blinked. What did you say?" Emma's eyes fluttered open, blue and bright as ice. "It's in your brain," she murmured. "You've been pretending not to feel it, but it's growing. It's angry because you're afraid to stop." Reinhold stumbled back a step, his face draining of color. "That's impossible," he said hoarsely. "You're bluffing." Emma shook her head weakly. "It's been there for a while. It started small behind your eyes, but it's bigger now, spreading. It's eating the parts that remember things." The silence that followed was suffocating. Dr. Hayes stood slowly, staring at Reinhold. "You've been having symptoms, haven't you?" he asked softly. "Headaches, blurred vision, confusion." Reinhold said nothing, but the flicker of terror in his eyes was answer enough. "This is absurd," he snapped finally, his voice trembling with anger more than certainty. "You're letting a child play mind games." "No," Margaret said quietly. "You're just afraid she's right." He turned on her, his composure shattering for the first time. "You think I'm afraid? I've dedicated my life to curing diseases like this. If I were sick, I'd be the one to find the cure." Emma's small voice cut through his outburst. "Then let me help you." Reinhold froze, staring at her, the tiny, trembling girl who somehow knew more about him than any machine ever could. For the first time, there was something human in his face. Not arrogance, not greed, but fear. "You can't help me," he whispered. "Yes, I can," Emma said softly. "But not if you keep being mean." Sarah pulled her closer, panic flaring. "No, Emma, you've done enough tonight." But the little girl only smiled faintly. "It's okay, Mommy. He just needs to remember how to stop hurting." Reinhold took a step back, shaking his head as if trying to physically push away her words. "Enough," he snapped. "This conversation is over. Agents, take them both into custody for voluntary containment and observation. We'll proceed through the proper channels." Dr. Hayes stepped forward sharply. "You can't detain them without a warrant, Marcus." Reinhold's voice rose. "I don't need one when public safety is at risk." Margaret moved then, not thinking, not hesitating. Her newly strong legs carried her forward, and she planted herself firmly between Emma and the advancing agents. "If you touch her," she said, her voice low and dangerous, "you'll answer to me." The agents stopped, uncertain. Reinhold looked at her, really looked at her, at the woman who was standing on legs he had once called dead tissue. For a heartbeat, something flickered in his eyes. Awe? Guilt? Maybe both. Then his mask slid back into place. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "No," Margaret replied, standing tall. "It's just beginning." Reinhold turned to leave, his hand trembling as he adjusted his glasses. He didn't notice the faint tremor in his fingers, or the small streak of blood that had begun to trail from his left nostril. As he stepped into the cold night, Reinhold's face was pale, his eyes distant. He pressed a shaking hand to his temple and whispered to himself, "She can't be right. She can't." But deep inside, the first tendrils of fear had already begun to grow. The gift meant to heal the world was now locked in a lab meant to dissect it. The federal medical facility in Bethesda looked more like a fortress than a hospital. Tall white walls reflected the winter sun with blinding intensity, and security gates buzzed with mechanical precision. Inside, everything smelled of disinfectant and fear. Emma Collins, the little girl who made miracles, had been here for 4 days. The halls were long, silent, and cold, designed for control, not comfort. Cameras blinked in every corner. Metal doors hissed open only when granted permission from unseen eyes. To most people, it was just a government research lab. To Emma, it was a cage made of glass and machines. Sarah sat beside her daughter on the narrow hospital cot, gently brushing her golden curls. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered, though her own voice trembled. "They said it's only temporary." Emma looked up, her blue eyes calm but tired. "They say that because they don't want you to worry, Mommy, but they're not going to let us go. Not yet." In the corner, the two-way mirror reflected their every move. Behind it, doctors and agents watched, clipboards in hand, hearts wrapped in policy. Dr. Marcus Reinhold was among them, though he looked nothing like the confident man who had led the raid at the Thompson mansion. His face was pale, drawn. His eyes were ringed with exhaustion. Every day since Emma's words, the headaches had worsened. Every scan confirmed what she had told him. The tumor was real, and it was spreading fast. He kept glancing at the girl through the glass, torn between professional obsession and desperate hope. She had been right about everything else. Could she also be his only chance at survival? But beside him stood a new figure, cold, precise, and untouched by doubt. "Dr. Reinhold," the man said crisply, "we've finished the preliminary analysis of the subject's samples." Dr. Reinhold looked up. And? Dr. Patterson, head of biomedical research, with a reputation for brilliance and brutality, smiled thinly. And we've confirmed it. The child's blood exhibits bioelectrical patterns we've never documented before. It's not just chemical healing. It's something else entirely. Something we can't yet classify. He leaned forward slightly. You understand what this means? If we can isolate the mechanism, we could replicate it. Controlled regeneration, neurological restoration, immortality. Reinhold's expression darkened. She's not a specimen, Patterson. She's a little girl. Patterson's cold eyes gleamed. A little girl who can rewrite the laws of biology. You don't lock that away in a classroom. You study it. You use it. Reinhold didn't reply. He simply stared through the glass again. At Emma, sitting cross-legged on the cot, softly humming to herself as Sarah braided her hair. Later that day, Margaret arrived. She walked now, slowly, but with pride in every step. Dr. Hayes accompanied her, his presence adding the calm authority of a man who had witnessed the impossible. The Kamiko guards scanned their IDs, their expressions uneasy. It wasn't every day a woman they'd been told was paralyzed for 15 years walked through their checkpoint. Mrs. Thompson? Dr. Patterson greeted coolly when they entered the observation room. I understand you've established some legal involvement in our case. Margaret smiled, though there was no warmth in it. That's right. As of this morning, the Emma Collins Medical Trust is officially recognized by federal law. I'm her co-guardian and financial benefactor. Patterson frowned. That's highly irregular. It's perfectly legal, Margaret countered, and it ensures that every procedure, every test, every drop of her blood goes through me first. Dr. Hayes stepped closer. She's not your lab rat, doctor. Whatever you're planning, it stops here. Patterson's thin smile didn't waver. You can delay, Dr. Hayes, but you can't stop discovery. This child represents the next step in human evolution. The world doesn't wait for permission. Margaret's voice turned sharp. Then the world can wait, because if you harm her, I'll bury this facility in lawsuits so deep the sun won't find you. For the first time, Patterson's smile faltered. That evening, Margaret and Hayes were granted a short visit with Emma. The child's room was sterile and bright, the walls painted with cheerful murals that failed to hide the cameras. Mrs. Thompson! Emma exclaimed, lighting up the moment she saw her. She ran, barefoot, hair tousled, and wrapped her arms around Margaret's legs. Margaret knelt, holding her tightly. Oh, sweetheart, I've missed you. Dr. Hayes crouched beside them, studying her carefully. How are they treating you, Emma? Emma hesitated, then looked toward the cameras. Her voice dropped to a whisper. They're scared, she said. Not just of me, but of what they found. Margaret frowned. What do you mean? Emma's eyes darted nervously toward the mirror. They found something in my blood, something they can't explain. It moves when I think about people I want to help. It changes when I'm happy or sad. Hayes's eyes widened. Bioreactive cell activity, he murmured. That's impossible. Emma nodded solemnly. It's what makes me help people, but now they're afraid of it. Margaret's stomach turned cold. Afraid how? They said it shouldn't exist, Emma whispered. They said it might not even be human. The words hung in the sterile air like a curse. Sarah tightened her arms around her daughter, tears spilling freely. You are human, she said fiercely. You're the most human person in this place. Emma smiled weakly and rested her head on her mother's shoulder. I know, Mommy, but they don't. A door opened behind them. Dr. Patterson entered, his expression perfectly composed. Visiting hours are over. Margaret rose slowly to her full height. You'll answer for this, she said. Patterson adjusted his glasses. You misunderstand, Mrs. Thompson. You approved this, as her guardian. Margaret's breath caught. Approved what? Patterson's smile was polite, practiced, and chilling. Tomorrow morning, we begin the next phase of our investigation, a deep tissue biopsy to analyze cellular regeneration. Dr. Hayes's voice hardened. You can't perform invasive procedures on a child without consent. Oh, we have consent, Patterson replied smoothly. Yours. He tapped a document on his clipboard. Signed, witnessed, and filed this morning by your legal counsel. Margaret stared at the page in horror, her own signature staring back at her. I never… Standard language, Mrs. Thompson, Patterson interrupted. You gave authorization for medical observation and analysis. This falls under that category. He turned to leave, his tone almost casual. The child will be prepped at dawn. When the door closed, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. Emma looked up at Margaret, her small voice trembling. Mrs. Thompson? Margaret knelt beside her again, tears shining in her eyes. Yes, sweetheart? Emma leaned closer, whispering so softly it barely reached her ears. Tomorrow, she said, they want to take pieces of me. Margaret's blood ran cold as she realized the nightmare wasn't coming. It had already begun. Some battles aren't fought with weapons, but with courage, love, and truth. Morning sunlight filtered through the tall conference room windows of the Bethesda facility, trying in vain to soften the sterile atmosphere. The air hummed with tension, the kind that precedes history or tragedy. Around the long steel table sat a collection of power. Federal officials in tailored suits, physicians in crisp lab coats, legal advisors clutching files marked classified. In front of them stood Margaret Thompson, no longer the paralyzed widow in the wheelchair they remembered from her medical records, but a woman reborn, standing tall on her own 2 legs. Beside her, Dr. Hayes kept his arms folded, face stern. Sarah Collins sat close, holding Emma's small hand in both of hers. The little girl's blue eyes flicked around the room, calm but aware. She seemed to sense every flicker of fear, greed, and curiosity in the adults before her. At the head of the table sat Dr. Marcus Reinhold. He looked nothing like the confident scientist who had led the raid weeks ago. His once composed features were hollow now, his skin pale with illness. And though his hands trembled slightly as he sorted through the files before him, his voice, when it came, was steady. Thank you for coming, he began, his tone rasping with fatigue. We are here to discuss the next steps in the case of Emma Collins and the ethical and medical implications of her condition. Margaret stepped forward, her heels striking the floor like gavel blows. You mean the implications of keeping a little girl in a cage while men argue over who owns her? There was a ripple of discomfort around the room. One of the federal officials, Agent Wells, the lead liaison, cleared her throat. Mrs. Thompson, we understand your emotional investment, but this is a matter of humanity, Margaret cut in. That child healed me, not with machines or drugs, but with something you can't quantify. Love, hope, faith, whatever you want to call it. And you've turned it into a science experiment. Dr. Hayes placed a calm hand on her shoulder, grounding her. Let's hear them out, he murmured. But Margaret wasn't the only one trembling with emotion. Across the table, Dr. Reinhold lowered his head into his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. Emma, he said softly, you told me the truth, didn't you? The room went still. Emma looked up, her expression gentle. Yes, she said. It's bigger now, isn't it, the sickness in your head? A murmur swept through the officials. Dr. Patterson stiffened, his cold gaze snapping to Reinhold. What is she talking about? Reinhold lifted his eyes, and for the first time, his composure broke completely. She's talking about this. He reached into a folder and slid a set of scans across the table. MRI results. The images showed a dark mass spreading across the left hemisphere of his brain. Stage 4 glioblastoma, he said simply. Terminal. Gasps filled the room. Even Patterson's icy demeanor cracked. My God, he breathed. Reinhold's voice was calm now, almost resigned. The child told me weeks ago, before the tests, before the symptoms got worse. I didn't believe her. He turned toward Emma, eyes glistening. But I do now. Emma met his gaze without fear. You don't have to be scared, she said softly. You were mean because you were sick. But you don't have to be mean anymore. Reinhold's lips trembled into something between a smile and a sob. Emma, if you can really help me, if you can stop this thing, I'll give you what you want. The officials looked up sharply. Dr. Reinhold, you can't make... He raised a shaking hand. Yes, I can. I'm the lead on this project. I can change the terms. He turned back to Emma, his voice breaking with desperation. You heal me, and I'll see to it that you and your mother go home. No more tests, no more containment, you'll be free. The room was silent, except for the faint ticking of the clock. Emma tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. Then she nodded slowly. Okay, she said. But I have 3 rules. Every official leaned forward. Margaret's heart pounded. First, Emma said clearly, my mommy stays with me the whole time. Nobody takes me, anywhere alone. Reinhold nodded weakly. Done. Second, she continued, Mrs. Thompson gets to visit me every day, until you let us go. Margaret's throat tightened, tears burning behind her eyes. Agreed, Reinhold whispered. Emma's eyes softened. And third, she looked around the room, at the faces that had judged her, feared her, and tried to own her, and her voice grew stronger. You have to promise never to lock up kids like me again. If you find more of us, you help us. You don't hurt us. The room fell deathly silent. Even Dr. Patterson's pen froze above his notepad. Agent Wells cleared her throat. This is highly irregular. Reinhold cut her off, his voice rising with sudden conviction. You heard her. Those are her terms, and I accept them. He turned to Patterson. Effective immediately, all containment orders are suspended. Emma Collins is no longer a subject, she's a consultant. Patterson's jaw clenched. You can't just... Reinhold slammed his fist on the table. I can. I'm dying, not deaf. And I'm not leaving this world as the man who destroyed a miracle out of fear. Margaret watched as something extraordinary unfolded. The power dynamic, once tilted entirely toward control and authority, shifted. In the middle of the cold, sterile room, it wasn't the government, the doctors, or the law that held command. It was a child, an 8-year-old girl with golden hair and eyes that saw into souls. She had taken their fear and replaced it with awe. Okay, Emma said softly, climbing down from her chair. We can start now. Reinhold hesitated. Now? She nodded. The angry sickness doesn't wait. Patterson stood abruptly. This is madness. You can't allow an unsupervised... Sit down, doctor, Reinhold said coldly. For once in your life, just watch. Emma walked toward him and gently placed her hands on either side of his temples. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Close your eyes, she whispered. And remember the first time you helped someone, not for money or fame, but because it made your heart feel warm. Remember that, and let the sickness hear it. Reinhold exhaled shakily, his eyes fluttering shut. The monitors on the table began to beep, faintly at first, then louder. Brain activity spiking, heart rate climbing, patterns on the EEG lighting up like fireworks. Dr. Hayes leaned forward, watching the impossible unfold on the screen. Dear God, he whispered. She's doing it. The hum of machines filled the room as Emma's small hands glowed faintly against Reinhold's temples, and the monitors spiked so violently that every alarm in the lab began to scream. She didn't just heal a man. She healed humanity's faith in the impossible. The room was a storm of sound and light. Machines screamed, alarms flashed, and the cold, clinical air seemed to pulse with a strange, living energy. Emma's small hands remained pressed against Dr. Reinhold's temples, her eyes closed, her golden curls trembling as if stirred by an unseen wind. Margaret stood frozen beside Sarah, unable to speak. Dr. Hayes hovered near the monitors, his eyes wide as the data spiked into impossible ranges. Neural activity that should have been chaos was resolving. Threads of color knitting together across the digital brain map, like light repairing darkness. Dr. Patterson had backed away from the table, pale and sweating. "Shut it down," he gasped. "She's overstimulating his nervous system. It could kill him." But Dr. Hayes shook his head. "No, look at his vitals. His heart's stabilizing. Neural waves are normalizing. This isn't overstimulation." He turned toward Margaret, awe softening his voice. "This is restoration." Reinhold's breathing slowed. His body stopped trembling. And then, silence. The alarms ceased. The flickering lights steadied. Emma's small frame swayed, and Sarah darted forward, catching her before she could fall. "Mommy," Emma whispered weakly. "I'm okay. Just tired." Reinhold slumped forward onto the table, gasping as if surfacing from deep water. The monitors displayed something no one in that room had ever seen. Perfect, symmetrical readings. Every trace of the malignant tumor that had been eating his brain was gone. Dr. Hayes's voice broke the silence first, barely above a whisper. "There's no cancer. It's vanished." Reinhold raised a trembling hand to his head, his eyes wild, disbelieving. "I can feel it," he murmured. "The pain, it's gone. My thoughts are clear. My God, she did it." Sarah clutched Emma tighter, tears streaking her cheeks. Margaret couldn't move, couldn't speak. All she could do was stare at the frail, pale child who had done what medicine, money, and miracles could not. For a long moment, no one dared to speak. The fluorescent lights above them buzzed faintly, filling the silence that felt like the breath of a new world. Then, slowly, Dr. Reinhold stood. The room collectively tensed, watching as he lifted a hand and placed it gently on Emma's shoulder. "Thank you," he said quietly, voice trembling with humility. "You didn't just save my life, Emma. You saved my soul." Emma opened her eyes, blue and luminous, and smiled faintly. "I told you the angry sickness didn't like it when you stopped being mean." Laughter, real, broken, grateful laughter, rippled through the room. Even Agent Wells, who had spent weeks treating the child as a federal anomaly, wiped at her eyes. Dr. Patterson turned away, his rigid composure fractured. For the first time, he looked less like a scientist, and more like a man who'd just watched everything he believed in fall apart. Hours later, in a whirlwind of signatures, phone calls, and orders shouted down hallways, the unthinkable happened. Dyke's containment order was lifted. Margaret and Dr. Hayes stood side by side as the final document was stamped, cleared for release. Sarah held Emma's hand tightly, both mother and child trembling as they were escorted, not by guards this time, but by officials with reverence in their eyes, through the same steel doors that had once locked behind them. Outside, the winter air was bright and cold, the sky a sharp blue expanse. Snow covered the ground, glittering like diamonds beneath the morning sun. Margaret stepped forward on her own 2 feet, her cane forgotten in the crook of her arm. She turned to Emma with tears blurring her vision. "You didn't just heal me, sweetheart," she whispered. "You healed everything." Emma squeezed her hand gently. "I just helped you remember what you already had inside, Mrs. Thompson." Dr. Hayes smiled faintly. "Out of the mouths of angels," he murmured. Dr. Reinhold followed them outside, walking slowly, his once ashen face now radiant with health. He inhaled deeply, as though taking his first real breath in years. "I'll make it right," he promised. "Every file, every test, every piece of data on her. I'll bury it. She deserves a life, not a legacy." Margaret met his eyes. "Then that's how you'll prove you were worth saving." He nodded once, the weight of both guilt and redemption in his gaze. 6 months later. Spring sunlight spilled over a quiet Boston neighborhood. The Thompson mansion, once a place of silence and sorrow, now hummed with life. Children laughed in the gardens where Margaret once stared out her window in despair. Down the street, the Collins' modest home sat beneath a blooming cherry tree. Through the open window came the sound of Emma's laughter. She sat at the kitchen table, crayons scattered around her homework, curls glowing gold in the afternoon light. Did you finish your drawing, sweetheart? Sarah called from the stove. Almost, Emma said, tongue peeking out in concentration. She held up her paper proudly, a picture of 3 people standing in front of a giant mansion. A tall woman smiling, a nurse with kind eyes, and a little girl with wings faintly outlined in yellow crayon. Sarah's breath caught. Wings, huh? Emma shrugged, smiling. They're not real ones. They're the kind you feel. From the garden outside, a familiar voice called. Lunch is ready, my loves. Margaret's voice, full of laughter, strong and warm. Emma jumped from her chair, her yellow sundress fluttering as she ran out to greet her. Margaret bent down, slowly, gracefully, to catch her in an embrace. It still amazed her every time, the weight of her own body, the movement of her legs, the gift she'd been given. And yet, she'd come to realize the miracle wasn't in walking again. It was in believing again. Dr. Hayes soon joined them, setting down a basket of flowers on the picnic table. The 4 of them shared stories, laughter and silence, the kind that didn't hurt anymore. The world outside remained unaware of the miracle that had happened that winter. The government's files were sealed, the story classified and buried. But some truths don't need headlines. They live in the quiet spaces of people's hearts. Because sometimes, miracles aren't meant for fame. They're meant for faith. As the sun dipped behind the trees, Margaret watched Emma chase butterflies across the grass, her laughter echoing like music. She turned her face toward the sky, whispering a quiet thought she hadn't dared believe in for years. Maybe God doesn't send angels from the sky anymore, she said softly, smiling through tears. Maybe he sends them in yellow dresses with curls and blue eyes. And somewhere deep inside, a warmth stirred in Margaret's heart, the same warmth that had once awoken her legs, as if heaven itself had just nodded in agreement. If this story touched your heart, imagine how many others need to hear it, too. Hit like if you believe miracles still happen, and subscribe for more stories that remind us there's still light in the darkest places. Tell me in the comments, do you believe some people are born to heal more than just bodies? Your one click can help someone rediscover faith, hope, and love today.